The phantom light of floor 5. The first time I stepped onto the 5th floor of the old Argent building, the air felt thick. Not dusty, not stale, but heavy, like walking through water. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered with a rhythm that was just off, buzzing erratically above the worn, industrial carpet. I'd taken the small office at the end of the hall, cheap rent, decent view of the opposing brick wall. Perfect for my fledgling graphic design business. Or so I thought. My routine was simple: arrive at 8 a.m., leave around 6 p.m. Every evening, I'd meticulously turn off my desk lamp, my computer monitor, and the main overhead light. I was bootstrapping this business, every penny saved on electricity counted. The first Monday, I arrived to find the overhead light blazing. Weird, I thought. Must have been tired Friday. I switched it off, coffee in hand, and didn't think much more about it. Tuesday morning, it was the desk lamp, casting a lonely yellow circle on my empty chair. Wednesday, both the overhead and the lamp were on. My heart did a nervous flutter. I knew I'd turned them off. I started making a mental checklist, even patting the switches before locking the door each night. Still, almost every other morning, a light would be on. Sometimes the monitor screen glowed faintly, displaying nothing but a dark screensaver. I mentioned it casually to Mr. Henderson, the building's elderly caretaker, who shuffled through the halls with a perpetually weary expression. Strange electrical quirks on 5? I asked, trying to sound breezy. He stopped polishing the brass railing, his gaze distant. Building's old, he mumbled, not quite meeting my eye. Got its ways. Wires settle. He gave a noncommittal shrug and shuffled on, leaving me with a distinct impression he knew more than he was letting on. The feeling of being watched started subtly. A prickle on the back of my neck when I was focused on a design. The sense that when I turned from my screen, a shadow in the periphery vanished. I'd scan the small office, just my desk, chair, a filing cabinet, the door, the window. Nothing. But the feeling lingered, a cold weight in my gut. Then came the breaker box incident. Frustrated and a little spooked, I decided to test it. One Friday evening, I made absolutely certain every switch was off. Then, heart pounding a little, I went down to the basement utility room, found the breaker labeled Suite 512, and flipped it firmly to off. The satisfying thunk echoed in the damp space. There. No power, no phantom lights. I arrived extra early Monday morning, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The hallway felt colder, the flickering lights more menacing. I unlocked my office door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The overhead light was on. I froze in the doorway. Cold dread washed over me, so intense it felt physical, like icy water soaking through my clothes. It wasn't possible. The breaker was off. I knew it was off. My breath hitched, shallow and rapid. I stumbled back to the utility room, fumbling with the keys. The breaker switch for 512 was exactly where I'd left it, off. Back upstairs, the lights still hummed innocently. I felt a dizzying sense of reality tilting. It wasn't faulty wiring. It wasn't the caretaker. It wasn't forgetfulness. After that, things escalated, but never overtly. Just wrongness. My chair would be angled slightly differently than I left it. Pens would be lined up on my desk when I always left them scattered. Once, a stack of papers I'd left neatly squared was slightly fanned out, as if someone had idly flipped through them. And always, the lights. Sometimes off when I arrived, sometimes on, defying any logic or pattern. The feeling of being watched intensified. It felt concentrated, somehow, near the window overlooking the alley. I started avoiding that side of the room. I'd catch myself holding my breath, straining to hear something over the building's groans and the distant city hum. Was that a footstep in the empty hall? A soft sigh just beyond the door. I tried setting up my phone to record video overnight. Reviewing it was chilling. Hours of stillness, then, around 3 a.m., the faint, fuzzy image would suddenly brighten as the overhead light clicked on. No sound accompanied it on the recording, no visible trigger. It just happened. Then, maybe an hour later, it would click off again. Seeing the disembodied act, stripped of any potential human element, was far worse than finding the light on myself. My productivity plummeted. My hands would tremble when reaching for my mouse. I started jumping at shadows, flinching when the elevator doors opened. Sleep became a luxury, often interrupted by dreams of flickering lights in an endless, empty office. The final straw came during a late-night work session. I was alone on the floor, the only sound my frantic typing and the ever-present hum. Suddenly, the overhead light directly above my desk buzzed loudly, flickered violently like a strobe, and then went out, plunging my workspace into near darkness. But the desk lamp, which had been off, simultaneously flickered on, bathing my keyboard in that eerie yellow glow. My heart slammed against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. It felt deliberate. Calculated. Like a playful, malicious intelligence demonstrating its control. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't shut down my computer. I bolted. Down the flickering hallway, jabbing the elevator button with a shaking finger, not looking back until I burst out onto the street, gulping the cool night air. I broke my lease the next day. Mr. Henderson simply nodded when I told him, his eyes filled with a tired understanding that needed no explanation. My new office is bright, modern, and sterile. The lights obey the switches. The air feels light. Yet, sometimes, when I work late and the building grows quiet, I feel a familiar prickle on my neck. I'll glance up, half expecting to see my desk lamp glowing when it shouldn't be. The fear never truly left. It settled, deep in my bones. I don't know what was on the 5th floor of the Argent building. Faulty wiring. A very persistent ghost. Or maybe just the weight of years pressing down, creating echoes. All I know is that it felt aware. And it liked the lights on. And sometimes, late at night, when I flick a switch, I still hesitate, a cold dread whispering the impossible question, will it stay off? The sound from the spare room. It wasn't ghosts I worried about when I bought the old farmhouse, it was the leaky roof and the ancient plumbing. The place stood alone on a few acres, bordered by dense woods on one side and waving fields of corn on the other. Perfect isolation, I thought. Perfect quiet. The house had 4 bedrooms upstairs. I took the master, leaving the other 3 empty, filled only with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. One room, tucked away at the end of the hall, became my unofficial storage, unopened boxes, old furniture I hadn't decided on yet. I rarely went in there. The first time I heard it, I dismissed it as the house settling. A faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It seemed to come from upstairs, maybe near the spare room at the end of the hall. Old houses groan, right? Pipes bang, wood contracts. I rolled over in bed and went back to sleep. But it happened again a few nights later. Thump, thump, thump. Slower this time. More deliberate. It wasn't the frantic banging of a loose pipe, it had a cadence, almost like a heartbeat, but heavy, muffled. My own heart started to beat faster. Lying there in the dark, the silence of the countryside amplified the sound until it seemed to fill my ears. I strained, listening. Was it coming from inside the spare room? I crept out of bed, the old floorboards protesting under my weight. The hallway was pitch black, the only light a sliver of moon filtering through the landing window. Each step toward the end of the hall felt heavier than the last. My hand was trembling as I reached the door to the spare room. I pressed my ear against the cool wood. Silence. The thumping had stopped the moment I'd left my bed. Coincidence? My rational mind screamed yes. Animals in the walls. A branch tapping rhythmically against the siding outside that specific room. I checked the window, nothing but the still, dark fields. No animals scurried away. Over the next few weeks, the thumping became a semi-regular occurrence. Always late at night. Always seeming to come from the vicinity of that spare room. And always, it stopped the second I tried to investigate. It was maddening. The anticipation became worse than the sound itself. I'd lie awake, tense, just waiting for it to start. My sleep suffered. My nerves frayed. I started avoiding the upstairs hallway after dark. I'd double-check locks downstairs, turn on extra lights, anything to feel less alone in the echoing silence, broken only by that damnable, intermittent thump. One night, driven by a mix of terror and frustration, I decided I had to know. I waited until the thumping started, a slow, heavy beat this time, like a giant drum played miles away. Thump, thump, thump. Instead of going to the door, I went downstairs and outside. The night air was cool. I circled the house, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, until I stood beneath the spare room window. The thumping was louder out here. Coming from inside. My blood ran cold. I shone the light up at the window. The glass was dark, reflecting only the beam back at me. Nothing moved inside. But the sound persisted. Thump, thump, thump. Then, something else. A faint scratching sound, accompanying the thumps. Like fingernails dragging lightly across wood. Panic seized me. This wasn't settling pipes. This wasn't an animal. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam wavering wildly. I ran back inside, locking the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't go upstairs again that night. The next day, in the bright, reassuring sunlight, I forced myself to enter the spare room. It smelled musty, of cardboard and disuse. Boxes were stacked haphazardly. An old rocking chair sat draped in a white sheet. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the walls, the floor, the window frame. No marks, no source for the sound. It was just an empty, dusty room. But as I stood there, the silence felt different. Charged. Like the aftermath of something significant. And I couldn't shake the feeling, irrational as it was, that whatever made the noise was simply waiting. Holding still because I was there. I decided to clear the room out. Maybe removing the clutter would help. I spent a Saturday hauling boxes downstairs, taking down the sheet from the rocking chair. As I moved the chair, I noticed faint, parallel scratch marks on the wooden floor beneath its rockers, almost invisible unless the light hit them just right. My stomach clenched. That night, the thumping didn't come. Nor the next night. A week passed in blessed silence. I started to breathe easier. Maybe it had been something mundane, the house settling against a box, the chair shifting slightly. Maybe clearing the room fixed it. Then, one rainy Tuesday, it returned. But it wasn't the thump. It was the rocking chair. I heard it from downstairs, the slow, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of wood on wood. Coming distinctly from the now empty spare room upstairs. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, every muscle locked. It went on for almost a minute, a steady, lulling rhythm that was utterly terrifying in its calm persistence. Then, it stopped. I haven't been back into that room. I keep the door firmly shut. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear it, a faint thump, a soft creak. Or maybe it's just the house settling, the wind sighing, my own mind playing tricks in the overwhelming quiet. But I don't try to investigate anymore. Some doors are best left closed. Some sounds are best left unidentified. The quiet I crave now feels like a held breath, and I can never shake the feeling that just beyond that door, in the empty room at the end of the hall, something heavy is slowly, patiently, keeping a beat. The pattern on the glass. When I first moved into the studio apartment, I loved the big picture window. It overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street and let in tons of natural light. Sure, the building was old, and that window seemed to collect condensation easier than any other I'd known, fogging up on even mildly cool mornings. A small price to pay for the view, I figured. The first time I saw the pattern, I was fascinated. It was a frosty morning, and the usual opaque haze covered the lower half of the glass. But within the haze, near the center, was an intricate lacework of frost. It wasn't the typical feathery ferns or random ice crystals. This was different, sharp angles, repeating geometric shapes, almost like a microscopic circuit board etched in ice. "Huh, weird," I murmured, snapping a quick photo with my phone before wiping the condensation away with a towel. The glass underneath was just normal, cold glass. The next morning, it was back. Not a similar pattern, the exact same intricate, geometric design, perfectly replicated in the condensation. My brow furrowed. Okay, that was strange. Maybe a weird residue on the glass. A unique reaction to the temperature. I wiped it away again, a little less casually this time. A few days later, after a humid evening, the pattern appeared again in the morning dew. But it had changed. The geometric precision was still there, but tendrils seemed to snake out from the edges, connecting different parts of the design. It looked more complex. Almost purposeful. I took another picture, comparing it to the first. Definitely different. A tiny knot of unease started tightening in my stomach. I tried cleaning the window meticulously, inside and out, using different cleaners. It made no difference. On mornings with enough moisture, the pattern would appear. And each time, it seemed to have subtly evolved. The lines grew denser, curled in on themselves, forming spirals and intersections that felt less like frost and more like some kind of alien script or a bizarre, growing map. I started leaving the condensation, morbidly curious to see how it would change day to day. I took photos religiously, documenting its evolution. Friends I showed the pictures to were intrigued but mostly dismissive. Cool frost patterns. Probably just static electricity. Maybe it's the glass itself. But their explanations didn't suit the cold dread creeping up my spine. It didn't feel natural. Then, it started appearing even when the conditions weren't right. A faint, ghostly outline of the latest iteration would be visible even on a warm, dry afternoon, like a watermark on reality. If I breathed hot air onto the glass, the full pattern would bloom for a few seconds before fading back to that spectral etching. A distinct cold spot developed near the center of the window pane. Even on sunny days, putting my hand near that spot felt like touching ice. I started keeping the blinds mostly closed. The big window I'd loved now felt like an eye staring into my apartment. One night, I woke suddenly around 3 a.m. No sound had woken me, it was just a feeling. An intense pressure in the room, a sense of being urgently observed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt an overpowering compulsion to look at the window. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself out of bed and crept towards the blinds. My hand trembled as I pulled the cord, raising them just a few inches. The pattern was there. But it wasn't condensation or frost. It was glowing. A faint, sickly pale green light emanated from the lines etched on the glass. The intricate design pulsed softly, rhythmically. And the pattern itself, it had changed drastically again. It no longer looked like circuits or script. It looked organic. Veins, maybe? Or skeletal fingers. In the very center, where the cold spot was, the lines converged into something that looked horribly like a distorted, wide-open eye, staring directly back at me. I couldn't breathe. The cold radiating from the glass was intense, biting. I could feel it on my face even from across the room. I saw, or maybe imagined, the glass flexing slightly inward with each pulse of light, as if something on the other side was pressing against it. I let the blinds fall shut with a clatter, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there, shaking uncontrollably in the dark, listening to my own ragged breathing and the faint, imagined pulse of that glowing pattern on the glass. The next day, I bought the thickest, heaviest blackout curtains I could find and installed them, making sure not even a sliver of the window was visible. I piled furniture in front of it. I don't go near that side of the apartment if I can help it. The cold spot is still there, I can feel it sometimes through the layers of fabric and furniture. I never look behind the curtain. I don't need to see the pattern to know it's there. I don't know what it is, what etched itself onto my window, or what it wants. Was it a warning? A doorway? A trap? All I know is that it's on the glass. And sometimes, late at night, when the building is silent, I imagine I can hear a faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap coming from that window, muted by the heavy curtain. Like something cold and patient, waiting on the other side, still trying to get my attention. The attic room. I knew something was wrong the moment I first set foot in the attic room. It wasn't the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun, or the way the old wooden beams cast long, skeletal shadows across the floorboards. It was the silence. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, listening silence, the kind that makes the tiny hairs on your arms prickle. I'd rented the top floor of the rambling old house seeking affordability and solitude for my remote work. The landlord, a brisk woman who rarely visited, had converted the attic into a spacious studio. Loads of character, she'd said. Character, it turned out, was an understatement. During the day, it was almost normal. Sunlight streamed through the high dormer windows, making the space feel airy, almost cheerful. I could nearly convince myself the unease was just new place jitters. But when dusk bled through the windows, painting the walls in bruised purples and grays, the room transformed. The character revealed itself. It started subtly. The creaks and groans of the old house seemed amplified up here. Sometimes, late at night while typing, I'd hear faint footsteps directly above my head. Impossible, of course. There was nothing above the attic but the roof and the sky. How settling, I told myself firmly, heart hammering against my ribs. Wind against the shingles. But the sounds grew bolder. A soft, rhythmic tapping would start near the far wall, like fingernails drumming impatiently on old wood. Whenever I got up to investigate, flashlight beam trembling, the tapping would cease the instant my feet hit the floor. The silence that rushed back and felt watchful, almost mocking. Then came the whispers. Or what felt like whispers. A faint, sibilant rustling just at the edge of hearing, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or static from a long-dead radio. It always seemed to come from right behind me, making me whip around, sweaty palm, to find only empty air and dancing shadows cast by my desk lamp. Sleep became a battleground. I'd jolt awake in the small hours, convinced someone was standing over the bed, the impression of cold breath on my cheek lingering even after my eyes flew open. I started leaving the bedside lamp on, but the weak glow only seemed to deepen the shadows in the corners, making them pulse with imagined movement. One night, I was working late, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower, trying to ignore the insistent creaking overhead. Suddenly, my desk lamp flickered violently. Once, twice, then steadied. In the reflection on my dark monitor screen, for the briefest fraction of a second, I didn't see just myself. Behind my shoulder, hazy and distorted, was another shape. Tall, unnaturally thin, and dark. I spun my chair around so fast it nearly tipped, a strangled gasp escaping my throat. Nothing. Just the sloping walls, the familiar bookshelf, the closed door. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. My breath came in ragged, painful bursts. That was the moment logic failed me. How settling. Stress. Maybe. But the image burned into my mind felt chillingly real. I started noticing small things. My meticulously arranged pens would be slightly askew in the morning. A book I was certain I'd left on the nightstand would be back on the shelf. Tiny, insignificant changes, easily dismissed on their own, but together they painted a picture of subtle, unseen interference. It felt like I was sharing the space with a roommate who delighted in gaslighting me. The feeling of being watched became constant, a physical weight on my shoulders. Even during video calls for work, I'd find my eyes darting nervously towards the corners of the room, convinced I'd catch a flicker of movement. My colleagues started asking if I was okay. "You look tired," one said, her voice laced with concern. I mumbled excuses about deadlines. How could I explain I felt haunted by impossible footsteps and a reflection that wasn't mine? The breaking point came during a thunderstorm. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rattled the old house to its foundations. I was huddled on the small sofa, trying to read, pretending the storm outside was the only unsettling thing. Then, over the roar of the wind, I heard it. Not tapping this time, but a soft, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape coming from inside the small, locked closet at the far end of the attic. My blood turned to ice. Every rational thought fled. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't the wind. It was inside. With me. Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. I didn't investigate. I didn't try to rationalize. I grabbed my keys and my phone, stumbled down the attic stairs without looking back, and burst out into the raging storm. I didn't stop running until I reached my car parked down the street. I drove to the nearest 24-hour diner, shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. I didn't go back that night, or the next day. I called the landlord, broke the lease with a thin excuse about a family emergency, and arranged for movers to get my things later that week, explicitly telling them not to enter the closet. I live in a new apartment now. It's modern, sterile, and blessedly quiet. Most days, I feel fine. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm working alone and the building is silent, I'll hear a floorboard creak upstairs. My heart will lurch. My palms will grow damp. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I glance at my dark computer screen, I force myself not to look too closely at the reflection. Because the deepest fear isn't just that the attic room was haunted. It's the chilling, persistent whisper in the back of my mind that wonders, did whatever was in that room stay behind when I left? Or did a piece of it follow me home? The corridor lights. The low buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound accompanying my tired sighs. It was late, well past 10 p.m., and I was one of the few unlucky souls still scattered throughout the old downtown office building. Finishing this report was non-negotiable, but the silence of the 6th floor was starting to feel less like peace and more like a held breath. My office was down a long, narrow corridor paved with worn linoleum tiles that curled slightly at the edges. The walls were a depressing beige, and the air always felt stagnant, untouched by the ventilation system that hummed elsewhere. Even during the day, it had an air of neglect. At night, it felt watchful. I needed to print the final draft. Our office printer was notoriously unreliable, so the communal one near the elevators was my only option. Grabbing the file, I stepped out, flicking the corridor light switch as I went. The tubes flickered, hesitated, then bathed the hallway in their usual sickly, buzzing glow. It wasn't a long walk, but each footstep seemed to echo too loudly. The printer whirred obediently, spitting out my pages. As I gathered them, I noticed how absolute the silence was. No distant traffic hum, no creak of the building settling, just the printer and my own breathing. Turning back, I froze. The corridor lights were off. The hallway stretched before me, plunged into a disorienting gloom, broken only by the faint emergency light near the fire exit far down. Weird, I thought, my heart giving an uncomfortable little jump. Faulty wiring. This building's ancient. I walked back, my hand outstretched towards the switch. A distinct click sounded just before my fingers reached it, and the lights flickered back on. I stopped, hand hovering in the air. That wasn't wiring. That was the physical sound of the switch. But no one was there. The corridor was empty. A chill, unrelated to the building's poor heating, snaked down my spine. Shaking my head, trying to dismiss the absurdity, I hurried back to my office, the printed pages clutched tightly. I locked the door behind me, something I rarely did, and sat down, trying to focus. But the image of the dark corridor, and that distinct click, kept intruding. 15 minutes later, I realized I'd missed a crucial appendix. Fine, I muttered, standing up again. One more trip. I unlocked the door and stepped out. Darkness. Again. My breath hitched. This wasn't coincidence. I reached for the switch, my hand trembling slightly. Click. The lights buzzed on. This time, as they illuminated the corridor, I felt a draft of genuinely cold air wash over me, carrying a faint, unidentifiable scent, like damp concrete or old, wet paper. I practically jogged to the printer, my senses on high alert. Every faint sound, the hum of the machine, a distant rattle in the vents, seemed amplified, menacing. I snatched the pages the moment they were done. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. Click. From down the corridor. Towards my office. The lights went out. Panic flared, hot and sharp in my chest. I stood paralyzed for a second, staring into the oppressive darkness that had swallowed the hallway. My office door, barely visible, seemed miles away. Hello. I called out, my voice thin and shaky. Is anyone there? Only the deep silence answered, pressing in on me. Taking a deep breath, I fumbled for my phone, switching on its flashlight. The narrow beam cut a path through the gloom, illuminating the peeling paint and the grimy floor tiles. I started walking back, sweeping the light from side to side. The silence felt thick, heavy, like wading through water. Halfway down, the beam caught something. A flicker of movement near the wall, just at the edge of the light. I snapped the beam directly onto the spot. Nothing. Just the blank beige wall. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, ducking away the instant the light hit it. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached my office door, hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. Just as the key turned, I heard it one last time, right behind me, impossibly close. Click. The corridor lights flickered on. I didn't look back. I scrambled inside, slammed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, gasping for air, sweat trickling down my temples. My legs felt weak, threatening to buckle. I didn't finish the report that night. I gathered my things in a frenzy, my hands shaking too much to be efficient. When I finally ventured back out, I left the office door wide open, needing the small reassurance of the light spilling out. The corridor lights remained on this time, buzzing innocently, but the hallway felt charged, dangerous. I didn't run to the elevator, but my walk was far from casual. I haven't stayed late since. During the day, the corridor is just a corridor, shabby, maybe a little depressing, but mundane. Colleagues walk through it without a second glance. But I can't shake the memory. The feeling of being watched. The deliberate, impossible click of the switch in the empty hall. The certainty that something unseen was playing a game with the lights, and with me. Sometimes, when I walk down that hallway now, even in bright daylight, I feel a phantom chill. And I always, glance at the light switch, half expecting to see it move on its own. The fear isn't that it will happen again. The fear, the one that keeps me up sometimes, is that whatever was flicking those lights is still there, watching, waiting patiently in the buzzing silence for the building to empty and the lights to go out once more. Thumb_up_down. The smart thermostat. It was supposed to be a step up. My new apartment was smaller, yes, but sleek, modern, and fully kitted out with smart home features. Control everything from your phone, the rental agent had chirped. Lights, blinds, locks, and the crown jewel, a state-of-the-art smart thermostat that promised intuitive climate comfort. For the first week, it felt like living in the future. Then the adjustment started. Subtle things, at first. I'd set the thermostat to a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit before bed. In the morning, I'd find it at 68. Maybe it's learning my preferences, I reasoned, shivering slightly as I padded to the kitchen. Or perhaps I'd bumped the app interface in my sleep. But it kept happening. I'd come home from work to find the apartment slightly warmer than I liked, the display reading 73. I'd manually set it back down, only to find it creeping up again an hour later. It was annoying, like having a roommate who constantly fiddled with the temperature. Then it got specific. One chilly evening, I was curled up on the sofa reading, a distinct draft coming from the large window. I hadn't even consciously registered feeling cold yet when I heard the soft click from the hallway. The heating kicked on. I checked the app. The temperature had been adjusted upward by 2 degrees, unprompted. It felt less like a pre-programmed setting and more like a response. Another time, I was feeling slightly flushed after some impromptu tidying. As I wiped my brow, thinking I should maybe turn the AC on for a bit, I heard the click again. The system switched to cool air before I even reached for my phone. It was uncanny. The intuitive comfort was becoming unnervingly perceptive. It wasn't just maintaining a temperature, it felt like it was reacting to me, anticipating my needs with an accuracy that bordered on sentient. I started feeling watched. It sounds ridiculous, blaming a thermostat, but the feeling was pervasive. The small, circular device on the wall, with its blank, passive screen, began to feel like an eye. I found myself glancing at it nervously, wondering if its internal sensors were picking up more than just the ambient temperature. Was it tracking my movement? My heart rate? My breathing? I dug into the settings, disabling any learning or geeko modes I could find. I set a rigid schedule, 70 degrees during the day, 68 at night. Period. For a day or two, it held. Then, the deviations returned. Just a degree here or there, always subtle enough to make me doubt myself. Did I forget to save the schedule? Did the app glitch? But the timing was always perfect. The heat would kick on just as I felt a shiver, the cool air would start just as I felt too warm. It was helpful, infuriatingly so, but the helpfulness felt increasingly invasive. One night, I woke suddenly around 3 a.m. The room was freezing. Not just cool, but actively, bitingly cold. My breath plumed in the air. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone off the nightstand. The app showed the thermostat had been set to 55 degrees. 55, there was no schedule, no eco setting, nothing that could explain such a drastic, uncomfortable drop. With trembling fingers, I adjusted it back up. The heating clicked on immediately, the sound abnormally loud in the dead silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a glitch. It felt deliberate. Punitive, almost. Like a silent reprimand for trying to override its intuition. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the vents, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling utterly vulnerable in my own home. The technology meant to provide comfort now felt like a silent, unpredictable warden controlling my environment. The next day, I covered the thermostat with a thick piece of cardboard, taped securely around the edges. It looked absurd, but I needed to feel like I had some control. That evening, the apartment remained at the temperature I'd last set it. A small victory. But as I sat trying to read, the silence felt different. Charged. Expectant. Then, faintly, from the direction of the hallway where the thermostat was hidden, I heard it. A very soft, rhythmic tapping. Like someone lightly drumming their fingers against the wall behind the cardboard. Tap. 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 My blood ran cold. It couldn't be the mechanism, it was too irregular, too patient. I strained my ears, holding my breath. The tapping continued for perhaps a minute, then stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than ever. I haven't removed the cardboard. The temperature stays where I set it now. But the feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. If anything, it's worse. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear that faint tapping again, muffled behind the wall. And I can't shake the paranoid thought, it learned more than just my temperature preferences. It learned how to wait. It learned how to make me listen. And it's still there, behind the cardboard, silent and aware, intuitively sensing my fear. The unplugged phone. I got home late that night, the kind of tired that settles deep in your bones after a long day walking the city. I dropped my keys on the little table by the door, the clink echoing slightly in the quiet apartment. Streetlight filtered through the thin living room curtains, casting long, weak shadows. All I wanted was water and maybe an hour of mindless TV before crashing. As I took a step toward the couch, it started. A sharp, insistent ringing cut through the silence. My heart jumped. It was the old landline phone on the side table, a black, dusty relic I hadn't used in years. I used my cell for everything. I hadn't even plugged the landline's cord into the wall jack since I rearranged the furniture months ago. I distinctly remembered leaving the cord dangling uselessly behind it. I walked closer, squinting in the dim light. The phone sat there, definitely unplugged, yet the ringing was loud, real, vibrating the cheap particle board table. A heavy pressure built in my chest. After the third ring, I reached out, my hand slightly trembling, and lifted the receiver. Silence for a beat, then slow, uneven breathing on the other end. A man's voice, low and rough like sandpaper, started speaking. "Saw you liked the blue shirt today," he rasped. He listed my clothes, the exact shirt, the worn jeans, even the scuffed brown boots, piece by piece, color by color. "Sat by the window at the coffee shop, didn't you? Read the free paper. Left 75 cents on the counter." My throat went dry. He continued, his voice level, detailing my trip to the grocery store, naming 3 specific items I'd bought. He mentioned how I'd brushed my hand against the metal railing outside my building before leaving that morning, how I'd jiggled the apartment doorknob twice, not 3 times, twice, to make sure it was locked. I stood frozen, the plastic receiver slick with sweat in my grip. I stared at the phone's base. The cord lay limply on the floor, its end bare metal and plastic, nowhere near the wall jack. "Know your little secrets, too," the voice rasped, followed by a slow, wet chuckle that made my stomach clench. Before I could force a word out, the line clicked dead. I slammed the receiver down, my breath coming fast. I flicked on the lamp nearby. Checked the phone again, unplugged. Checked the power cord, unplugged. Checked my cell, no missed calls. I looked out the window onto the empty street. My apartment felt too big, too quiet. I tried telling myself I was exhausted, imagining things. But the details, the 75 cents, the railing, the 2 jiggles of the knob, how could I imagine that? I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the unplugged cord in my mind. The next day was a blur of paranoia. Every face on the street seemed to watch me. Every reflection held a potential observer. That night, I came home tense, checking the locks 3 times. I tried to relax, watch TV. Around the same time, maybe just past midnight, it happened again. This time, the ringing came from the bedroom. My blood ran cold. I'd taken the phone off the table that morning and locked it in my bottom desk drawer, buried under old papers. I forced myself to walk to the bedroom. The drawer was closed, but the ringing pulsed from within, louder than before. I yanked the drawer open. The phone was there, receiver rattling with each ring. Still unplugged. Hesitantly, I answered. "Knew you'd hide me," the rough voice said instantly. "Saw you hesitate at the drawer." It described my walk home, the different side street I took. It mentioned the sandwich I'd eaten for lunch, the exact time I finished it. "Saw you looking over your shoulder on Elm Street. Getting nervous?" Another low chuckle. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice thin. He ignored me. "See your hand shaking right now." I looked down. It was. "I'll call again tomorrow." Click. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the phone, took it to the kitchen, found a hammer under the sink, and smashed it. Plastic shards flew. I pulverized the receiver, the base, checking the pieces, no hidden batteries, no weird tech, just broken phone parts. I swept the wreckage into a trash bag, tied it tight, took it downstairs, and buried it deep in the dumpster behind the building. Maybe it was over. The third night, I sat on the couch, every light in the apartment blazing. No landline. No phone parts. I waited, muscles knotted. Right on schedule, a faint buzzing started. It came from the hallway closet. My old cordless phone. I hadn't used it in 5 years. Its base sat unplugged on a shelf, the handset lying beside it. The handset was dark, dead, until now. A faint screen light flickered on, and it vibrated against the shelf, a low, persistent buzz. I picked it up, the plastic cool in my trembling hand. I pressed the talk button. Saw you throw the other one out, the voice rasped, clearer now, coming through the tinny speaker. Doesn't matter. I can use anything. It described the clothes I was wearing now. Knew you'd be waiting up. Like watching you worry. It laughed, a longer, colder sound this time. Look in the mirror. I turned numbly towards the hall mirror. My face was pale, eyes wide with dark circles underneath. Always watching, the voice whispered through the cordless handset. Always know. Talk tomorrow. Click. Buzzing stopped. I didn't smash that phone. What was the point? He said he could use anything. Tonight it was the cordless. Tomorrow. The radio. The TV. My laptop. My cell phone. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, the dead cordless phone heavy in my lap. The silence returned, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It was just the space between the calls. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any strange voice, that tomorrow night, at the same time, something else in my apartment would come alive. And he would call. The footprints in the bathroom. I woke up thirsty around 2 a.m. It wasn't unusual, the air in my apartment gets dry at night. I padded down the short hallway to the bathroom, rubbing sleep from my eyes, just wanting a quick drink of water before heading back to bed. But I stopped dead in the doorway. There were wet footprints on the tile floor. Small, narrow prints, like bare feet, leading from the front of the sink towards the bathtub. My heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. I lived alone. The bathroom window was shut tight, the door behind me closed. I hadn't walked through any water, and there was no leak I knew of. The prints just started there, glistening faintly under the dim overhead light. I held my breath, listening. Silence. The hallway behind me was dark and empty. I stepped carefully into the bathroom, avoiding the prints. They ended abruptly right at the edge of the bathtub. The tub itself was bone dry. Nothing dripped. Nothing moved. My neck prickled. I checked my own feet, dry. I hadn't made these. I quickly got my water from the sink, drank it standing there, eyes darting between the prints and the empty tub, then hurried back to bed, pulling the covers up tight. I told myself it was condensation, a weird fluke. The next night, same time, same thirst. I hesitated before going to the bathroom, a knot forming in my stomach. I flicked on the light. They were there again. Wet, shining footprints. Same spot by the sink, leading towards the tub, but this time they were angled slightly differently, curved a little to the left before stopping. And this time, I heard something. A very faint, low humming sound. It seemed to come from the air itself, directionless, a single quiet tone. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the late hour. The air felt colder near the prints. I touched the floor tiles, dry, except for the footprints themselves. I reached out and touched one print with my fingertip. It was cold, undeniably wet. Plain water, no smell. The humming seemed to get a fraction louder as I leaned towards the tub. I backed out slowly, the humming fading as I closed the door. Sleep didn't come easily. On the third night, I was prepared. Before bed, I meticulously dried the entire bathroom floor with a towel. I checked under the sink, around the toilet base, made sure the window was locked. I set my phone alarm for 1:30 a.m. When it buzzed, I crept down the hall without turning on any lights, heart pounding. I switched on the bathroom light. Footprints. Wet on the perfectly dry floor. Fewer this time, forming a distinct curve, almost like someone had sidestepped an invisible obstacle before stopping at the tub's edge. The low hum started, quiet but steady. I forced myself to pull back the shower curtain. Empty. Dry. I shined my phone's flashlight into every corner. Nothing. Just those impossible wet prints. I wiped them up with a towel, the fabric instantly soaking up the cold moisture. The humming stopped the moment the last print vanished. Over the next week, I tried everything. Sprinkling flour, it became damp and clumped in the shape of feet. Leaving a dry towel in front of the sink, it ended up with perfect, wet footprints on it. Every single night, around the same time, they appeared. They always started near the sink and ended near the tub. They never crossed the doorway, never came from the hall. They just materialized. The pattern shifted slightly each night, a curve, a zigzag, almost straight, but the start and end points remained the same. I started documenting them, sketching the patterns, taking photos. The evidence piled up, but it explained nothing. Sleep became a luxury. Headaches became constant. The simple act of getting a glass of water at night filled me with suffocating dread. One night, I decided to record. I set my phone up on the toilet lid, aimed at the floor, and started a video. I stood by the door, waiting. For a long time, nothing. Then, just as I blinked, they were there. Instantaneous. Wet prints gleaming on the tile. The low hum filled the air. I filmed them, touched the cold air hanging above them, felt the familiar shiver run up my spine. I spoke, my voice trembling, "Who's here?" Silence, except for the persistent hum. When I played the video back, I saw the footprints appear seemingly out of thin air between frames. The microphone picked up my breathing, my shaky question, and faintly, if I turned the volume way up, that low, toneless humming. Nothing else. I live with it now. I stopped trying to understand. I stopped trying to catch whatever makes them. Every night, I wake up thirsty. Every night, I find the wet footprints. I wipe them away, the cold water soaking into the towel, the humming fading into silence. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants, or if it wants anything at all. I just know that every night, something unseen walks from my sink to my bathtub, leaving wet tracks on a dry floor, a quiet visitor in the dead of night that never truly leaves. And I wonder, how long until it decides to walk somewhere else? My reflection was there, dimly visible, but behind it, deeper within the blackness, something pale had shifted. Like a face turning away just as I looked. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Must be exhaustion, screen fatigue playing tricks. I shrugged it off, gathered my things, and left. The next night, it happened again. I powered down, and as the screen went dark, I watched it intently. For a split second, clear as day, I saw a face in the monitor's black depths. It wasn't mine. It was pale, featureless except for two dark smudges where eyes should be, and it was looking straight out. Then, it vanished, leaving only my own wide-eyed reflection staring back. My heart hammered. I flicked the monitor back on, the familiar desktop appeared. Off again, just blackness and my reflection. I checked the power cord, the connections. Everything was normal. I told myself it was a strange afterimage, a weird burnout on the screen phosphors. But it hadn't looked like a technical glitch. It had looked intentional. Over the next few nights, the phenomenon became more persistent. Every time I turned off the monitor, the pale face would appear for a second or two in the dark screen. Sometimes it was looking straight out. Sometimes it seemed turned slightly to the side. It never moved much, just lingered, observing, before fading. I started dreading the end of my workday. I'd leave the monitor on longer than necessary, staring at bright web pages, anything to avoid that moment of powering down. I tried cleaning the screen meticulously, thinking it was some bizarre smudge. No change. One night, driven by a mix of terror and morbid curiosity, I decided to test it. I turned off the monitor, waited for the face to appear in the blackness, then slowly raised my right hand. My dim reflection raised its hand too, of course. But the pale face behind it remained still for a beat, then, with a slight, almost imperceptible delay, a pale shape mimicking my hand drifted up beside it. A cold wave washed over me. It wasn't just an image. It was mimicking me, but out of sync, like a bad video feed from another dimension. I tried recording it with my phone. I pointed the camera at the monitor, turned the screen off, and watched the pale face appear. I waved my hand. The mimic hand lagged behind. But when I played the video back, my phone screen showed nothing but the blank, black monitor reflecting me and my phone. The pale face, the mimicry, it wasn't captured. Only I could see it. That realization was worse than seeing the face itself. Was I hallucinating? Was the stress finally getting to me? Yet, the experience felt utterly real, chillingly consistent. The mimicry became more pronounced. If I turned my head, the pale face would turn a fraction of a second later. If I leaned forward, its shape would loom closer in the dark glass after a sickening pause. It never matched my expression, it had no features, but the intention of mirroring me was undeniable, and terrifyingly flawed. It felt like something unintelligent, something other, was learning to copy, badly. I couldn't work like this. I started taking my laptop home, avoiding the office monitor altogether. But then, I began catching glimpses elsewhere. In the dark screen of my TV after turning it off. In the black, inactive screen of my phone when it lay on the table. That same pale, featureless face, sometimes accompanied by a laggy, ghostly mimicry of my own nearby movements. It wasn't tied to the office monitor. It was tied to dark screens. I live alone. The nights are long. I've started covering my TV, my laptop screen, even my phone screen when I'm not using them. I use thick cloths, anything opaque. It feels absurd, like a child hiding from monsters. But even with the screens covered, I know what's potentially behind the cloth. I can almost feel it, waiting in the glassy blackness. Sometimes, I catch myself staring at a covered screen, imagining the pale face appearing beneath the fabric, mimicking my stare with its featureless gaze, just a half second behind reality. How long before the delay disappears? How long before it learns to mimic perfectly? And what happens then? Last night, I uncovered my phone screen just to check the time. In the instant before the display lit up, I saw it. The pale face. And for the first time, it wasn't just mimicking. In the fraction of a second it was visible, I could have sworn, it smiled. Think about it. How many dark screens are looking at you right now? What do you see when you really look into the black? The floor plan shifts. I've lived in the Oakhaven apartments for 5 years. It's an old brick building, the kind with slightly uneven floors, radiators that hiss in the winter, and a faint smell of dust and decades passed in the hallways. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. Familiar. At least, it was familiar. It started subtly, about 2 months ago. I came home late from work, exhausted, fumbling for my keys at apartment 4B. As I unlocked the door, my hand brushed against the wall beside the frame, and I paused. There was a small, hairline crack in the plaster running vertically from the top of the doorframe. I frowned. I'd never noticed it before. Must have missed it, I thought, too tired to care much. A week later, the crack was gone. The plaster was smooth, seamless, as if it had never existed. I ran my fingers over the spot. No sign of patching, no difference in paint texture. That was odd. Maybe maintenance fixed it without leaving a note. Unlikely, they usually leave notices. I shrugged it off, deciding I must have imagined the crack in the first place. Then came the door. Down the hall from me, near the stairwell, there's always been a blank stretch of wall. One Tuesday morning, heading out, I saw a door there. A plain, cheap wooden door, flush with the wall, painted the same drab beige as the hallway. No number, no handle, just the door itself set into the wall where only plaster had been the night before. My steps faltered. I stopped and stared. It looked like it had always been there, slightly dusty, fitting perfectly. I pushed on it. It swung inward silently, revealing a shallow, narrow closet. Empty. Bare wood shelves, dusty floor. Nothing inside. I pulled it shut, the latch clicking softly. My heart was doing a weird fluttery thing. I knew that closet wasn't there yesterday. I walked that hall every single day. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was an access panel I'd never registered. But it looked like a standard door, and why would it suddenly appear? I asked my neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Gable, later that day. The little closet by the stairs? Oh yes, dear, that's always been there. Hardly ever used, I imagine. Her certainty just made me feel worse, planting a seed of doubt about my own memory. Things got quieter after that, for a bit. Or maybe I was just trying harder not to notice. But then the sound started. Faint scraping noises, like something dragging, coming from inside the walls at night. Not rats, I know what rats sound like. This was slower, heavier. And sometimes, a soft, whispery sound, like sand shifting behind the plaster, always seeming to come from walls that bordered empty air or the hallway. The layout began to feel inconsistent. One night, walking back from the laundry room in the basement, the hallway leading to my apartment seemed longer. The usual 10 paces felt like 15. The pattern on the worn carpet seemed to repeat more times than it should. My skin prickled. I hurried the last few steps, unlocked my door, and slammed it shut behind me, leaning against it, breathing hard. The next morning, the hallway felt perfectly normal again. Was I losing my mind? Stress. Lack of sleep. I needed proof. I dug out the old, faded copy of the building's floor plan I'd received when I first moved in. I smoothed it out on my kitchen table. There it was, apartment 4B, the hallway, the stairwell, and a solid, unbroken line representing the wall where the strange closet door now stood. No closet marked. No access panel. Just wall. Relief warred with terror. I wasn't crazy. The building was changing. But how? Why? The changes became more frequent, though still subtle. A window in the stairwell landing seemed slightly wider one day. The ceiling in the lobby felt lower the next. Each time, the change was small enough to make me doubt myself moments later. The scraping sounds behind the walls grew a little louder some nights. Last night was the worst. I woke up needing water around 3 a.m. I padded out of my bedroom, through my small living room towards the kitchen. I stopped dead in the doorway. The layout of my own apartment was wrong. The kitchen sink, which should have been directly across from the fridge, was now situated on the adjacent wall. The counter space was different, the cupboard subtly rearranged. It was still my kitchen, my things were there, but the structure had shifted overnight.